Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and in America that means New Comic Book Day, when excessively hairy he-blobs actually go outside for a change and waddle to their nearest LCS, their local comic shop, where they halitosis all over the new issues, but don't actually buy anything. And once upon a time, in fact for a long time, uh, I indulged in that ritual myself, not only going to the local comic shop, and before that to the dry goods store where there was a spinner rack of new comics, uh, but also going the whole 9 yards. There was a long period where I had a pull list at my local comic shop where you fill out a list for the comic shop owner of the titles you intend to buy in the upcoming month on a regular basis, and they pull them for you so that you don't run the risk of getting there and having them be gone. Sometimes enterprising shop owners will give pull list people a small discount on the comics, but one way or another, they like the regular business. It helps them to know what to order and how to stay afloat. And there were many years where I did that. But as comic shops proliferated all over the country, and as comic book culture went more and more mainstream, all of a sudden, and also grew up, all of a sudden, the two big superhero comic book companies, Marvel and DC, realized that they had a market for adult money. They could print books. They could reprint volumes, sometimes very ornate ones, of older stuff, and have print volumes of the finished arcs of all their new stuff too. And once I realized that, I realized it a long time ago. Once I fully came to terms with it, just looked at it clearly, I realized I'm buying these issues at $3 a pop, and then if I like the story, I end up buying the collection. And on top of that, I have issues that go back 60 years that are just sitting in boxes here and every other apartment. And the solution to both those problems was the same thing, which was to just buy graphic novels, just buy collections and graphic novels. Don't buy the individual issues anymore. So I don't do that. I don't buy the individual issues anymore. I just wait for the trades, and I also buy a fair amount of the reprints of older stuff that come out. So when I look at the lists that are posted online of the stuff that's coming out that week, I judge accordingly. And I looked at the list for today in the comic shop, and there was only one thing that really jumped out at me, and it was an example of what I'm describing doing wrong. I would have been buying the same thing twice. There was a softcover reprint volume of the very first few issues, the very first few appearances of the Legion of Superheroes, which is my favorite team superhero. One of my favorite, It and Superman are my favorite comic books just in general. And the reason that I didn't get it is because it would have been an example of buying the same thing twice, because this is a paperback reprint of one part of this big Megillah, this huge hardcover. The paperback that came out today is like a third or a half of this volume. And I already have this volume, and I use it all the time, so I didn't see the point in getting the paperback today. But it did give me the perfect opportunity to talk to you a little about the Legion of Superheroes, which appeared in Adventure Comics in 1958. So they're having an anniversary right now. It's a little bit of a sad anniversary because there's currently no TV show. There's currently no big movie franchise. There should be. They should be on their fourth movie by now. And there's currently, scandalously, no comic book. There is no Adventure Comics. There is no Legion of Superheroes. There is no Tales of the Legion. There's nothing like that. The Legion of Superheroes does not exist in the DC continuity at the moment. They don't have their own comic book. They don't have their own adventures. It's just disgraceful. But in that 1958 issue, it was written by Otto Binder, and it was drawn by Al Plastino, and it was, at the time, Adventure Comics was so much fun. I absolutely loved Superboy. The character, the fun of those episodes, of those issues, and the fact that he had a dog, a superpowered dog. And he lived in a small town in the American Midwest. It was just wonderful. I think that today, somebody could capture the wonder of those stories perfectly in either a comic book or live action if they tried. I don't think anybody even thinks about the continuity. The DC continuity has been revamped many times since those wonderful days back in 1958. I don't think anybody thinks about the pre-continuity revamped days. I don't think anybody thinks about that Superboy. Superman when he was a teenager, learning his powers alone, as far as he knew in all the world, a superpowered being, with adoptive parents that he loves, but they, we know perfectly well, he knows perfectly well they're not his real parents. He has high school crushes. It's all pre-technology, phone wires everywhere, fire hydrants, Al Capone style bank robbers. I think there's a huge opportunity being missed there. But one way or another, I love those issues. And the approach that the writers and the editors took was just to give you a wonderful conundrum in every issue, and then be done with it. There was no tortured continuity then. There was nobody saying, hey, wait a minute, isn't this character doomed to die or anything like that. And so you would get an issue where, for instance, Ma and Pa Kent would reveal to Clark Kent that he wasn't the first extraterrestrial baby they adopted. You'd think they'd have mentioned that earlier, but no, that they actually had a superpowered boy who was a delinquent, who was a bad version of Superboy, and a bunch of other things. And this was just supposed to be one more of those issues where Clark Kent is walking down the sidewalk and a boy casually says, "Hello, Superboy." And Clark said, he gets all nervous and says, "Oh, you must be making a mistake. My name is Clark Kent. I'm not Superboy." And then when he's flying patrol, another boy says, "Hello, Clark Kent," to Superboy. And he says, what's going on here? Oh my God, it's a different person, and both of them are making the same leap. And then he meets a young girl who says, "Well, hello, Clark Kent. Say hello to your foster parents, the Kents, for me." And it's a conundrum. It's supposed to be just a fun thing, and the answer is revealed right away that these are the three of them: Cosmic Boy, Lightning Lad, and Saturn Girl. The answer that's revealed is they're from the future. They're from 1,000 years in the future. They're the founding members of a group called the Legion of Superheroes, a gigantic super team entirely composed of superpowered teenagers from multiple worlds, who 1,000 years in the future fight evil and help with disasters on a whole bunch of planets in a gigantic galaxy-spanning civilization that reveres Superboy, hence the commemorative statue on this cover. And they use time travel technology to come back to the 20th century and meet Superboy in person. And they invite him to join their club. And this is an aspect of Superboy and the Legion that has been touched on a few times in recent years very well. That what a boon that would be to a lonely boy, the loneliest boy on Earth, to suddenly have not just one, but an entire crowd of super beings that he can go and hang out with in the future. Not to mention the fact that any teenage boy is going to love the fact that he's revered as a hero at the time. But so Superboy does. He goes with them to the future. And they have adventures. They haze him. They want him to join their club, but they give him the impression that he has to earn the right, and they also give him the impression that he's failing. And it all turns out to be a ruse. They were always going to accept him, so they indoctrinated him into the Legion of Superheroes, and then he goes back home. He goes back through time to the 20th century and thinks, isn't it great that I'm a member of the Legion of Superheroes 1,000 years from now? And the writer and editor thought very little more than that. Just a clever idea, like Superboy's superpowered delinquent half-brother. But the fans had a different idea. The fans deluged the offices of DC Comics with letters from all over the country, even small-town Iowa, saying, no, this is not the same as all those other things. We want more of the Legion. We want to meet more of the members. We want to see what they're doing in the future. We want to see Superboy with them more. Even a couple of adventurous letters saying we'd be happy to see them without Superboy. And it was a massive amount of letters, and DC Comics listened. They listened slowly, as institutions do. So it was a long time. It was 20 issues before the Legion of Superheroes appeared again. But when they did, they took off. The fans just wrote in like crazy saying, "Oh my God, thank you so much. You brought the Legion back." And one thing led to another. All of a sudden, we were getting more and more stories. We were learning about more and more Legion members, spending more and more time in the 30th century, seeing their adventures. And also, they were appearing in other Superman-related titles. They were appearing, they would make appearances in Superman. They would make appearances in Supergirl quite often. Always with the same lore. They weren't any different in each of those iterations. They were always the same. It was just the Legion. And fans got to know them, got to anticipate them, and all of a sudden people at DC started realizing that if the Legion of Superheroes appeared in one of your issues, it would do really well. and you'd get a lot of letters, a lot more than with a normal issue. So they became a hot spin-off property. I think probably the first in superhero comics. And eventually, way down the line, they started appearing regularly as a backup feature. Eventually, they got a comic of their own. And this huge volume is the very beginning of that story. Appearance by appearance, in chronological order, not just in Adventure Comics, but all through the Superman family. So you get all of the editors went and found every early appearance of the Legion in every Superman volume, and they include it all here. And it's delightful. Absolutely delightful. Because you're seeing it, if you're a Legion fan, you know what's coming. You're seeing this lore develop. We had no idea at the time. We just wanted more. We wanted to know why, like, for instance, are any of the Legion's aliens? It turns out that all 3 of the original Legionnaires who meet Superboy are as alien as he is. They're no humans. It takes us a while before we meet a human. And that stays true. Humans are the vast minority in the Legion of Superheroes extended ranks. Most of them are from other worlds. And that's fascinating. I know that's old hat now. But at the time, that was fascinating. And not only that, but the Legion of Superheroes, they have an adult benefactor, R.J. Brand, the richest man in the universe, who gave them a headquarters and lots of equipment and some cruisers and some jetpacks and whatnot. But he isn't part of the team. He's just the money. The more the Legion appeared, the more it became obvious that they don't have an adult leading them. They are their own team. They make their own decisions. And the more that was fleshed out, the better it was. For everybody reading, it was so much fun. And relationships started to develop between the Legionnaires. Romantic relationships, friendships. The writers started to have lots of fun with pairing all sorts of different superpowers, because the Legion is one of the entrance requirements was that you have a unique superpower. So you won't just have 20 superpowered, Superboys. So the powers range all over the map. There are Legionnaires who are incredibly powerful, as powerful as Superboy. And then there are Legionnaires who have almost no superpowers at all. Barely anything. Nothing that, something that might be effective against a 20th century bank robber, but not against an intergalactic villain. And pairing those and pairing the different personalities, so much fun to watch develop. In these early issues, the early part of this that was in that paperback today, we see, flight jetpacks, we see the very beginnings hinted at of a Legion Code, of Legion Code of Honor, of Legion rules and regulations, all that sort of stuff, that sort of world building it's barely in evidence in that first appearance, and it just keeps growing and growing with every installment, and I loved it. And I wasn't the only one. I think it's I live next to a war zone. As you know, because you hear screaming ambulances in every video. But I'm glad that I didn't go to my local comic shop today, because if I had, I would probably have double bought. I would probably have bought that paperback, just because I love it. Has a different cover than this, first of all, which is a silly reason to buy anything. But also because it might be a little more. I would have told myself it's a little more convenient. It's not quite as heavy as this. But this volume contains a whole world as it comes to its conclusion. It'll probably take the paperback reprints 3 volumes to finally reprint everything that's in this one volume. And oh my god, there's so much fun in these issues. So much fun. There's lots of silly stuff too. Ridiculous villains crop up all the time in the Legion, and also the Legion of Super Pets crops up quite a bit, quite a bit more than it should. All the super animals that the editors had introduced in other Superman titles, and also the Legion of Substitute Heroes. The Legion regularly holds tryouts for additions to its ranks, and dismisses people for sometimes the silliest reasons. Your power isn't good enough. Your power isn't powerful enough when some of the existing Legion members have almost no superpowers at all. Or you don't seem to have complete control over your superpower when, you could learn control and your superpower is incredible. So, maybe we take you anyway. And also, I never really understood the rule about no duplication of powers. They waive it for Superboy because eventually they let Supergirl join the team as well. And Superboy and Supergirl are teenage Kryptonians. They have identical superpowers. They waive it, but they don't tend to waive it in these early issues with anybody else, and that always confused me as well. But it was the kind of confusion that that us comic book fans back then really loved, because it was the first kind of thing where you could be invested in the invented world. Those early issues of Adventure Comics and Superman and Action Comics and Batman, for that matter, were wonderful because you weren't invested. You just had a great time for 20 pages, and then you were done. There was a mystery, there was a conundrum, there was a challenge, there was a surprise ending, and you were done. But you didn't invest. There was nothing to invest in. And the Legion changed all that. All of a sudden, there was a lore that you could invest in, and you wanted to know more about it. And so I'm glad. I guess I'll wrap up this Comics Wednesday by saying that although I'm outraged at the way DC Comics is treating one of its greatest franchises, and the franchise that has its most loyal fans. Legion fans are more loyal to their story than any other kind of DC fan. I'm outraged by the way that DC is treating this property. No Legion comic, no regular Legion appearances. When the Legion does reappear, I guarantee you they will have been retconned into some abomination of what they should be, which is a happy team of teenagers in the future. And no other properties, no TV show. You're willing to give us an expensive TV show about Superman's great-grandfather instead of giving us a story about the Legion? But although I'm outraged about that, I am glad that the Legion of Superheroes lives in DC's reprint culture. There are thousands of fans out there just like me who miss them and who bought these issues, and the issues are moldering away to dust, and now you can relive them in beautiful color, very well curated, nicely reprinted, in a nice big sturdy book. That was unthinkable in 1958. So I'm glad of that. So it's a little bit of a pro and con thing. I wish that I were talking to you about the Legion, and you can bet your bippy, although people don't say that anymore, that if DC Comics came out with, if they relaunched Adventure Comics or came out with the Legion of Superheroes, that is a monthly comic I would buy. But one way or another, I'm very glad to have this volume, and I'm glad that today, at least briefly, I exercised enough self-control not to go and tempt myself, because I know I would have bought that paperback volume, and then I'd have spent money on the same thing twice, which is the whole reason why I don't buy single issues of comics anymore. So I'm glad that I at least this far held out, and I keep looking at the advanced listings for the next Legion book. The next one that will arrive, I'll take anything. I can't wait. There's so much reprint stuff that could be done for the Legion of Superheroes. And those, I think there are probably two of you out there that even know anything about the Legion of Superheroes. And those two, there's one particular gigantic storyline for the Legion that has not been reprinted in a volume or many volumes or a big commemorative volume. The 5 Years After saga, and it really should be because it is so good. but it will be someday, and then I'll talk your ear off about it. And in the meantime, that's it for Comics Wednesday. A little bit of Legion lore for you. And I'll sign off for now, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.